The wind was sharp that day in 1877. It moved across the Dakota Plains like a knife, cold and endless. The sky above was heavy with gray clouds, and the land below looked like it had been forgotten by time. 10-year-old Arthur Prescott pulled, his coat tighter around him. His small boots crunched on the frosted ground as he followed the creek near his family's land. He was checking rabbit traps, but mostly he was just walking. Walking helped him forget. It had been 1 year since his mother died. Their small wooden cabin, once full of her voice and warmth, now felt like a prison made of silence. His father, Garrett, was not the same man he used to be. Once soft and kind, Garrett had become cold, his face locked in a frown, his hands only busy with tools and weapons. Arthur missed the way things used to be. He missed his mother's laugh, her soft hand on his forehead when he was sick, and the way she made their small house feel like home. Now there was only cold, cold in the house, cold in his father's eyes, and cold in his chest. That afternoon, something unusual happened. As Arthur walked near the water's edge, something caught his eye. A flash of color where there should be only brown grass and gray, stones, red and blue, like a piece of clothing. Curious, he stepped closer. The wind blew harder, and the trees whispered above him. He pushed through the tall grass, his heart beating a little faster. Then he saw her. A woman lay on the ground near the creek. She was old, very old. Her skin was deep brown and lined with many wrinkles. Her silver hair was long and loose, and her dress, though dirty and torn, had tiny colored beads sewn into it. Arthur froze. She was Lakota, a native woman. He had heard stories in town, angry stories. People whispered about battles, about danger, about not trusting them. He had seen his father reach for his pistol just at the sight of a stranger on horseback. But this woman wasn't a warrior. She wasn't a danger. She was a grandmother, and she was barely breathing. Arthur stood very still. The wind blew her hair across her face. Her lips were cracked. Her chest moved slowly. She was alive, but just barely. He remembered his mother's voice. Kindness is not just for people who look like you. It's for anyone who needs it. His father would be angry, but Arthur didn't care. He knelt beside the old woman. He pulled the cork from his canteen and poured a few drops of water into her mouth. Her eyes fluttered open. Dark eyes, deep eyes. Tired but aware. She looked at him, and for a long second they just stared at each other. No words. Just breath and wind and silence. Then she gave the faintest nod. Arthur swallowed hard. He had never helped someone like this before, but he knew what he had to do. "Come on," he whispered. "I'll help you." He placed her arm around his shoulders. She was light but heavy at the same time. Every step she took was slow, shaky. Arthur kept her close, guiding her gently through the grass past the trees toward the only home he had ever known. As they reached the cabin, Arthur could already see his father in the distance. Garrett was splitting wood with his axe. The sharp thud of wood against blade echoed through the cold air. Garrett looked up. He saw them, and he stopped. His face changed. The axe dropped, his hands clenched. His body stiffened like a wall. Arthur's heart beat harder. Garrett marched toward them. His boots hit the dirt like drums, his eyes were hard. "What in God's name are you doing, Arthur?" His voice was sharp. "She was by the creek," Arthur said, holding up the old woman with his small frame. "She's hurt. She needs help." Garrett's eyes locked on the woman. He saw her dress. He saw her face. "She's Lakota," he growled. "You brought trouble to our door." Arthur didn't move. His arm stayed around her. He didn't let go. "She's not trouble," Arthur said. "She's just lost." For a moment, Garrett didn't speak. Then he turned away. "She stays in the barn. One night. Then she's gone. Understand?" Arthur nodded. He helped the woman into the barn, where it was warmer and dry. He brought her straw to rest on and a blanket from the cabin. She lay down, slowly. Her eyes found his once more. And she smiled. It was small, but it was real. Arthur sat beside her in the quiet barn, the wind still whispering outside. He didn't know who she was. He didn't know what would happen next. But something had already changed. The barn was quiet. The smell of hay, leather, and old wood filled the air. Arthur sat near the Lakota grandmother, watching her sleep. She looked peaceful now, her chest rising slowly, her face calm. Arthur stayed beside her until his eyelids grew heavy. When he finally stood to leave, she opened her eyes and looked at him with quiet strength. In the morning, she was still too weak to walk. Arthur brought her a piece of bread, an apple, and a tin cup of warm milk. She took the food with slow, graceful hands. She did not speak, but nodded gently in thanks. Arthur didn't know her name yet, but he started calling her grandmother in his mind. He wanted to know more about her. He brought her little things to cheer her: a feather from his secret box, a smooth stone from the creek, a torn piece of blue cloth his mother had once sewn into his old coat. She held each item carefully. When he gave her the feather, she smiled softly and ran her fingers along its edge. She said something in her language, quiet and musical. Arthur didn't understand the words, but he understood the feeling. His father, Garrett, kept his distance. He stayed near the cabin, his eyes always watching. At breakfast, Garrett didn't speak much. He just drank his coffee and stared out the window. "You'll take her back soon," he said suddenly. "She can't stay here forever." Arthur nodded but didn't reply. He knew his father was scared of trouble, of what the neighbors might say, of what might come. But Arthur also knew the woman in the barn was no danger. That night, after Garrett had gone to bed, Arthur slipped out of the cabin. He carried a thick wool blanket, his mother's favorite. She had made it herself. He tiptoed into the barn. The woman was awake. She sat in the straw with her back straight and eyes bright. Without speaking, Arthur wrapped the blanket around her shoulders. Her eyes softened and she touched the fabric gently, as if she could feel the love still woven into it. Then she did something Arthur didn't expect. She reached out and touched his cheek. Her hand was dry and rough, but the touch was warm. It was the kind of touch his mother used to give, a soft, knowing kind of love. Arthur closed his eyes. For a moment, he didn't feel lost anymore. He stayed beside her and talked, even though she couldn't understand him. He told her about his mother, about the hawk he watched every morning from the hill, about the time he fell and cut his knee and his mother kissed it better. The woman listened with her eyes, her head tilted gently, as if she were reading his soul. For the first time in a year, Arthur didn't feel alone. The next morning, she was stronger. When Arthur brought her food, she stood slowly and helped carry the water bucket herself. Later, she took something from her small pouch, a needle made of bone and a piece of sinew. She pointed to the tear in Arthur's trousers. With patient hands, she sewed the fabric, her fingers moving with quiet skill. Arthur watched her. She didn't just fix the cloth. She gave it care. It was like watching someone mend a broken heart with every stitch. She smiled when she finished, a proud, soft smile. Arthur smiled back. In the doorway of the barn, Garrett watched them. He saw his son laugh, really laugh. Not the small, polite laugh he sometimes forced at dinner. This was different. It was real. Garrett looked away, unsure of what he was feeling. He had built walls around his heart since his wife died, but those walls were beginning to crack. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, the woman walked out of the barn for the first time. She stood beside Arthur and looked at the land. She pointed east. Then she touched her chest. Arthur understood. She wanted to go home. He felt a lump in his throat. He didn't want her to go. Before she left, Garrett came forward. He held a small cloth bundle. He handed it to Arthur. "Jerky," he muttered. "Give it to her." Arthur gave it to the woman. She took it, looked at Garrett, and gave a deep nod of thanks. Then she turned to Arthur. She placed her hand over his heart. A farewell. A promise. She walked away slowly, wrapped in the blanket his mother had made. Arthur stood and watched until she was gone. But he knew something had changed, and it was not the last time he would see her. The days after the Lakota grandmother left felt long and quiet. Arthur often walked to the barn and stood in the same spot where she had said goodbye. He still remembered the way her hand had rested over his heart. He still felt the warmth of her fingers. Life returned to its hard rhythm: chores, fences, hauling water. Garrett and Arthur worked side by side, but something had changed between them. Garrett talked more now, simple things like asking Arthur about the traps or pointing out fresh deer tracks. But still, it meant something. The wall between them was beginning to crack. But peace on the prairie never lasted long. Trouble came one hot afternoon. 3 strangers on horseback appeared on the road, their faces rough and unfriendly. Arthur was feeding the chickens when he heard the sound of hooves. Garrett stepped out of the cabin, his eyes sharp. The man in the lead wore a long, dusty coat. His smile was thin and dangerous. "Name's Vance," he said. "We're landmen. Heard this place has clean water. Pretty land, too." Garrett didn't smile back. "It's ours, bought and paid for." Vance shrugged. "Everything's for sale." "Not this," Garrett replied. Vance's smile faded. "Suit yourself. But out here accidents happen. Wild place, the plains." Then they turned and rode off. Dust followed them like a ghost. That night, Garrett stood at the window long after sunset. Arthur sat near the fire, trying to read. The air was thick with worry. Over the next week, things started to go wrong. The fence near the cattle pen was cut. The cows wandered off, and Arthur had to spend hours finding them. Then someone threw a dead animal into their well, poisoning their water. They had to carry water from the creek, far and slow work. Arthur watched his father grow more tired, more angry. One evening, Garrett handed Arthur a long, heavy rifle. "You need to know how to use this," he said. Arthur's hands shook as he took it. "I don't want to hurt anyone." "You don't have to," Garrett said quietly. "But you have to protect what's yours." They practiced behind the barn. Garrett showed him how to load the gun, how to aim. The sound of the shot echoed across the fields, loud and lonely. That night, Arthur couldn't sleep. He lay on his bed, staring at the dark ceiling, wondering what would happen next. His hand still felt heavy from holding the gun. He missed the Lakota grandmother. He missed peace. Then the worst came. It was a moonless night. Quiet, except for the crack of a branch outside. Garrett sat up in bed. "Arthur," he whispered. "Get up." A voice shouted from the dark. "Prescott, come out. Time's up." Arthur ran to the window. He saw the flicker of torches. 5 men now. More than before. Their shadows moved like wolves circling the cabin. "They mean to burn us out," Garrett said. He shoved the table against the door and loaded his rifle. He handed Arthur his weapon. "Stay low. Don't fire unless I tell you." Shots rang. Out. Wood splintered. Glass shattered. Arthur covered his ears, heart pounding like a drum. Vance's voice came again, cruel and loud. "You should have taken our offer." Then something strange happened. A sound rose in the distance, a low thump, slow and steady. It grew louder. Drums. Then came voices, deep, strong, rising in a chant that seemed to shake the ground. Arthur crawled to the window. He gasped. On the hill above their home stood a long line of riders. Dark shapes, still and silent. The torches below lit their feathers and spears. "The Lakota," Arthur whispered. "The dog soldiers." They did not speak. They did not move. They simply watched. Then the line opened and 2 horses stepped forward. One rider was tall and strong. The other was smaller, slower, wrapped in a blanket. It was her. The grandmother had returned. Arthur's heart lifted. She hadn't forgotten. Vance saw them too. His face went pale. "Let's go," he shouted. The men turned their horses fast, kicking up dust. Panic broke their strength. They galloped away into the night, chased only by their fear. The drums stopped. Silence returned. Garrett opened the cabin door slowly. Arthur stood beside him. Together, they stepped outside. The Lakota leader rode forward with the grandmother. He spoke in clear English. "My mother was lost. Your boy gave her kindness. You gave her food. That kindness is now returned." He pointed to the land. "This is your home. It will not be taken." The grandmother stepped forward. She held a small object in her hand, a stone tied in leather, with a single hawk feather hanging from it. "For the boy who is friend to hawks and grandmothers," she said. Arthur took it, tears filling his eyes. He didn't speak, he couldn't. But his heart was full. She had returned and she had not come alone. Arthur stood in silence as the dog soldiers sat tall on their horses. The grandmother, Istas, stood beside him, her blanket wrapped tight around her shoulders. The gift she had given him, a stone wrapped in leather with a hawk's feather, hung around his neck. It felt warm against his chest like it had its own heartbeat. Garrett was quiet too. He looked at the Lakota leader, Chayton, then at the other warriors on the ridge. His fingers rested on the rifle at first, but slowly he let it fall to his side. There was no more fight left in him, not because he was weak, but because he had just seen something powerful. Respect returned for kindness given. Garrett stepped forward. He looked at Istas, then at Chayton. His voice was rough but honest. "Thank you. For coming. For helping." Chayton gave a small nod. "Kindness is a bridge. Your son built it." Istas stepped closer to Arthur and touched the feather hanging from his necklace. "This will remind you," she said softly, her words gentle but strong. "Always remember, one small kindness can call back an army of love." Then she turned to Garrett. For a long moment they said nothing, but their eyes met, and Garrett gave her the same nod she had once given him outside the barn. Respect to respect. Heart to heart. The Lakota did not stay long. One by one, the warriors turned their horses and rode off into the night, disappearing, like shadows into the hills. Istas was the last to leave. She smiled at Arthur, truly smiled, and then she was gone. The silence that followed was not the same kind of silence the homestead once knew. It wasn't heavy, it wasn't lonely. It was peaceful, alive. Arthur and Garrett went back into the cabin. The torch Vance had dropped was still on the ground, now just a pile of black ash. Inside, everything was just as it had been, but everything felt different. Garrett sat at the table. He looked at Arthur and sighed. "Your mother would have been proud of you," he said softly. Arthur felt a lump in his throat. His father had not spoken of his mother in so long. He sat down too, the amulet still warm against his chest. The next morning, the sun rose bright over the prairie. The sky was open and wide, painted in soft gold and blue. Garrett made coffee and even offered Arthur the first cup, like his mother used to. They began their chores together. They fixed the broken fence, they cleaned the well. Garrett didn't say much, but he stayed close to Arthur all day. They didn't see Vance or his men again. No one dared come near. Word must have spread fast about what had happened. The story of the dog soldiers would move through nearby towns like wildfire. No man wanted trouble with the Lakota, not now. Weeks passed, then months. But Arthur kept the amulet close. He wore it every day, and when he sat by the creek or watched the hawks circling in the sky, he would think of Istas. He hoped she made it home safely. He hoped she was with her family, smiling by a warm fire, telling the story of the boy who helped her. Garrett and Arthur grew closer. The man who once spoke in cold, short sentences now listened more. He asked Arthur about his thoughts. He even helped rebuild the old tree swing that had broken after Mother died. There was still sadness in their home, but now there was also light. One morning, months after Istas had left, Arthur walked to the edge of the prairie to check his traps. He followed the trail by the tall grass just like always. But something caught his eye. Something tied to a branch. It was a piece of leather. Hanging from it was another feather, a red one this time. Arthur smiled. He knew what it meant. Somewhere, out there, the grandmother had remembered him, and maybe she had come close once more, watching from the hills, making sure he was safe. He took the red feather and tied it beside the first on his amulet. 2 feathers now. 2 memories. 2 hearts that had found each other across fear, silence, and distance. He turned back toward the cabin, the sun behind him, the wind gentle on his face. Garrett stood outside, waving him in for breakfast. Arthur walked toward home, and he knew, deep in his chest, deep in the place where his grief had once lived alone, that everything had changed because of one act of kindness, one brave choice, because a lost grandmother was never truly lost, and a boy who once felt invisible had become someone unforgettable.